Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about how you can boost your credit score, and then also I'm going to expose some stereotypical credit score myths. But first I want to talk to people who have a non-existent credit score. So in the video that I put out last week, I talked about credit score ranges and how once you do have a credit score, it can be anywhere between, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like between the 300s to 800s. But what happens if you don't have a credit score? Then your credit score is basically like zero or it doesn't exist. And that just means that you've never had any type of credit. Like you've never had a credit card, you've never had a bill in your name, you've never had a car loan or anything like that. Typically that's younger people, so kids, teenagers probably won't have a credit score yet, or that could be people who didn't grow up in America and now they've moved to America and they're building a life here and they'll have to start carrying and building a credit score, or people who have just always dealt with cash and have never needed or never had access to lines of credit. So there's different reasons as to why someone may not have a credit score, but we're going to talk about how you can build that credit score. So one thing you can do is open what's called a secured credit card. So the main difference between a secured credit card and then a regular credit card is with a secured credit card, you are basically putting that money up front versus the credit card company. So with a regular credit card, you open it, they automatically give you a credit card limit and they say, here you go. In this example, let's say they give you $1,000 as a credit card limit. That's them fronting the money. But with a secured credit card, you are fronting the money. So with that same example, you would then give them $1,000 as collateral or like a cash deposit. And then from there, you can basically start borrowing from yourself. And what it does is it shows like the credit card companies and the credit bureaus that you are starting to understand the process of having a line of credit, using it, and then immediately paying it back. Another thing you can do is have someone co-sign on a bill for you. So co-signing is basically when, let's say I have a credit score and you don't, I can co-sign on your loan and tell whoever you're borrowing the money from, like, hey, I vouch for them, and if they don't pay it, I'll pay it for them. So that's when someone co-signs for you. When I was just a young adult, I didn't really have a credit score and I needed to get my first apartment and I couldn't do that because I didn't have a credit score. So my mom had to co-sign on my lease, and because she did that, I was able to get the apartment, and I had a 1-year lease, and at the end of that lease I had enough credit history so that I could take her name off of the lease, and then it was just me on there by myself. And I did that because, you know, I didn't want my mom to continue to be on my lease. Number one, I didn't want her to be like accountable for me or liable. Maybe that's the better word. Like I didn't want, if something happened to me and I couldn't pay for the lease anymore, like I lost my job or something, I didn't want that to come back and affect her. So I took her name off of it. And then also, like, I just wanted to feel like an adult and I didn't want to have my mom's name on my lease. So yeah, so that's an example of having something co-signed. And with that example, that was for an apartment, but you can co-sign on a lot of things. You can co-sign on student loans. So like parents can take out student loans for their kids. You can co-sign on a car. Like there's a lot of things you can co-sign on. Personally, I would not co-sign for anybody unless I was married to them or I gave birth to them. And then even then, there would be stipulations because I'm not going to co-sign on just anything. Because like I said before, when you co-sign, you are now taking financial responsibility. If that person stops paying on their bill, then they will start looking at you to pay that bill. And you may think, oh, I don't have to pay this. You do. There are cases where you can get your wages garnished, which means like the government will come after you and they'll just take your money before you get your paycheck. So co-signing is not something that you want to take lightly, and it's not something that you should just lightly ask of someone. Like it should be someone who trusts you and you trust them, and it's a very, like dedicated type of relationship, and just, yeah, like don't take advantage of someone co-signing for you. Like that's not a good thing to do. So after you've done those first two things, one other thing you can do to start building credit is to start applying for actual credit cards. So once you graduate from the secured credit card, that's when you want to start shopping for just a simple, basic, entry-level credit card. One that doesn't have any annual fees, and one that preferably, in my mind, I think you should also look for ones that give you cash back. So I have had, my wallet isn't over here, but I've had the Citi Double Cash card for years, like 5 years, maybe more than that. It doesn't have an annual fee, and it gives you 2% cash back on all of your purchases once you pay them off. So 1% when you buy something, and then another 1% when you pay it off. And yeah, it's like a really simple credit card to use. So that's one that I recommend, but a lot of different companies have versions of that. So I would just say do your research and let that be like your entry-level credit card once you are done with the secured credit card. Okay, so we've covered how to actually start having credit. But now that we have it, let's talk about how we can increase your credit score. So one way to increase your credit score is to diversify your types of credit or your lines of credit. So what does that mean? A credit card is one type of credit. A car loan is a type of credit. A mortgage is a type of credit. Student loans are a type of credit. Medical debt is a type of credit, right? So all of these are different types. And as you get older, your life will just naturally start having these things. And I'm not telling you to just like run out now and like, oh, I need to get a higher credit score. Let me go back to school so I can get student loans, and let me go buy a car, and let me go buy a couch for my apartment. Like, no, that's not what I said to do. I'm saying that naturally over time, these things will happen, and when it does, that's when you can see an increase in your credit score. Now, it won't be a huge increase, and later in the video, I'll talk about like the biggest things that you can do, but I did want to mention this because once you do start to diversify your credit, it will increase your credit score by a smidge, but every point counts. Another thing you can do is to start building your credit score or credit history as early as possible. Now, for example, in my family, like I said earlier, my mom needed to co-sign my first apartment that I had because I didn't have any credit score. My younger brother, who just started his adulting journey, he didn't have to do that because he already had a credit score. Now, what did he do differently than I did? Nothing. But what did my parents do differently? So when my parents got my brother a car when he was in high school, which sounds privileged, I'll admit to that. But anyway, when my parents got my brother a car in high school, they actually bought it in his name, and they made the payments on time, and I'm pretty sure that car is paid off by now. And so all of that was under his name, which started to build a credit score for him, because that would have happened like when he was 17, 18 or something like that. So he's been building credit since then. Now, also, my parents got me a car when I was a senior in high school, but they didn't do the same thing that they did with my younger brother. They didn't buy the car in my name, they bought it in their name. And, adult me is like, really? Y'all did this for him? But parents are humans too, and it just didn't occur to them to do that for me, but they were financially savvy enough to do that for my brother. So that showed the difference. He already had a credit score and I didn't. So I say all this to say, the younger you can create a credit score, the better. But unless you are just a very financially savvy 16, 17, 18-year-old, you may not realize those things. So it's really up to kind of like the adults in your life to figure that out. Another way to increase your credit score is to never close the first credit card that you ever opened. And this ties into what I said before about the age of your credit history. And your oldest credit card is really what starts your credit history. And the way that they kind of create your credit age is they do an average of all of the, through like time, basically. They do an average of, let's say you opened up a credit card in 2015, and then the next card you opened was in 2018, and then in 2019, and then 2020. If you close that first card from 15, then your credit score age goes from this big to like this big, because the 2015 doesn't exist anymore. And when your credit score age is younger, that I guess symbolizes to like the credit bureau that you're not as mature yet. So you want your credit score to be as mature as possible. So you want it to be as old as possible. That's why a lot of people say like to never close the first credit card that you have. I don't even like the oldest credit card that I have. I never use it. In fact, they sent me a letter in the mail this month and was like, hey, we're gonna close this if you don't use it. And so I immediately used it because I don't want it to be closed. So you can like set a reminder on your phone like every couple months, hey, use this card to like get gas or something. Just use it for like small purchases, but just make sure that it never gets closed. And speaking of closing credit cards, let's say that you really don't want this credit card anymore. Instead of closing out that line of credit, see if you can downgrade that card or maybe upgrade it. Like, see if there's another credit card in that lineup that you can use instead that you would enjoy more. To avoid closing out the line of credit completely, just try to replace it. Something else that can affect your credit score is called hard inquiries. So basically that is any time that you're like opening a new line of credit and they have to check your credit score or credit history. That's called a hard inquiry or a hard pull. So that can happen if you are buying a new car and you're shopping around. That will take a hard inquiry. If you are shopping around for a house and you need a mortgage, that's a hard inquiry. The more of these that you have, that will lower your credit score. And they're kind of like, they're inevitable. Like, you can't really avoid doing it, but you can be strategic about how you do it. So plan out in advance when you're going to have a hard inquiry. And then also remember that even though once you do get a hard inquiry, it will lower your score, it only stays on your credit history for like 2 years. So it won't permanently affect your score. Okay, so those were a lot of the like smaller tips, which when put together, they do add up. But now let's get into like the bigger tips. So a really big thing is statement date versus due date of your credit cards. Now, based on how they're named, you would think that like, oh, I should pay my credit card on the due date. And you would be right about that if you want to avoid late fees. Always pay before the due date so that you don't have any late fees, which late fees will like really, really hurt your credit score. So never have a late fee attached to any of your bills. So that's your due date. But your statement date is the day that your credit card or whoever, or like the lender or whoever this lender is, that is the day that they report your balance to the credit bureaus. So that is the day that they say, me for example, let's say, oh, she had a credit limit of 10,000 and she's using 6,000 of that credit limit. She's using 60%, which is high. We'll get into that in a second, which is really high, right? So if I was able to pay it down so that I only have a balance of 3,000 out of my 10,000 credit limit, then that means that I would have used only 30%, which is a lot better than 60%, right? So paying your bills by the statement date, that is what will help boost your credit score. And then paying your bills by the due date, that is what will help to not decrease your credit score. And then similar to what I just talked about that 60% versus 30%, what I just described was called credit utilization. So that's basically out of how much money we gave her or him or them, how much money did they actually use? And a basic rule of thumb for credit utilization is that you want to stay below 30%. So like in the example that I just gave, the credit card company gave me a limit of $10,000. I never want to spend more than $3,000 if I'm concerned about keeping my credit score as high as possible. So like the threshold is 30%, but if you can keep it below 25%, 20%, 15, 10, like the lower the better. It'd be amazing if you could have a 0% credit utilization, but you know, just to be realistic, most people do carry a credit card balance. While yes, like I said, it'd be amazing if you didn't have any type of credit balance, but the only way that it will really start to hurt your credit score is if it's above that 30% credit utilization. So what you should aim for is below 30%. And lastly, I mentioned it before, but just to reiterate, don't have any late payments. And I know that life happens. I understand that. But late payments and your credit utilization, they make up like 65% of your grade that is the credit score, right? So if either one of those things are off, that is going to dramatically lower your credit score. And late payments, those can stay on your credit history for years. Remember how I was saying the hard inquiries only stay on there for 2 years? Late payments can stay on there for like 7 years. Yeah. Yes. So it's really, really, really important to not have any late payments. And again, I know that life happens, but do everything that you can so that you don't have a late payment. So let's say that your credit card bill is due January 5th, okay? And you wake up January 6th and you realize that you didn't pay the bill. Don't freak out. What will happen then is you will get charged a late payment, but it won't report to the credit bureau until like 30 days later, right? So you technically have that 30-day window before they report your late payment to the credit bureau. So you will have that late payment, but as long as you pay, as long as you like eventually pay within 30 days of your due date, then they won't report it to the credit bureau and your credit score won't decrease. You will have to take that L of paying the late fee, but at least your credit score won't go down. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I really hope that this was helpful. And you know, it's the start of the year, so I want people to start thinking about having a better financial year for 2024. So I wanted to make this video. Again, I hope it was helpful. If it was, give it a thumbs up, leave some comments down below, share it to someone who you think could benefit from it, and I'll see you next time.